June 15, 1944. Dawn broke over the islands of the Mariana archipelago, the sky a pale canvas of mist and scattered clouds. From the dense jungle and rocky ridges, Japanese soldiers peered toward the horizon, unaware that the air above would soon erupt with fire and thunder. Suddenly, the first streaks of silver appeared, P-51 Mustangs, slicing through the clouds with terrifying precision. Engines screamed across the sky, each aircraft a harbinger of destruction. Bomb racks gleamed in the sunlight, and machine guns glinted, ready to unleash a storm upon entrenched positions. Japanese commanders, watching from forward posts, froze. The sheer speed, altitude, and coordination of the approaching fighters defied their calculations. Communication lines buzzed frantically as men scrambled to prepare for the inevitable onslaught. Fear rippled through the ranks. One commander, gripping his map and binoculars, realized the hopelessness of the situation. His trained troops dug in for defense were no match for the skies now dominated by the Americans. He turned to his officers, voice shaking with urgency, and begged for retreat, a desperate plea in the face of overwhelming air power. The battlefield above would decide the fate of men on the ground, and the Japanese defenders were about to confront a new reality of aerial warfare. By mid-1944, the tide of the Pacific War had shifted dramatically. The United States had achieved air superiority over key island chains, and long-range bombers and fighter escorts dominated skies that were once uncontested. Japanese forces, despite their tenacity and training, faced an unprecedented aerial threat. Among the most feared aircraft were the P-51 Mustangs, fast, agile, and heavily armed fighters capable of both air-to-air combat and ground-strafing runs. The Marianas Islands, including Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, had become critical strategic points. Their airfields were essential for launching B-29 bombing raids on the Japanese home islands. Japanese defenders had fortified positions across these islands, bunkers hidden among dense jungles, artillery positions camouflaged under palm fronds, and infantry dug into ridges overlooking narrow coastal approaches. Yet their defenses were designed for conventional infantry and artillery attacks, not for the speed and precision of massed American fighter assaults from above. Intelligence reports warned Japanese commanders of the growing strength of American air forces. Reconnaissance missions and intercepted communications highlighted the presence of hundreds of P-51s and long-range bombers, fully equipped and ready to strike. Japanese troops had trained extensively for defensive engagements, yet training for an aerial onslaught of this magnitude remained limited. The psychological strain of constant air raids had already begun to erode confidence. The P-51 Mustang, introduced in 1942 but reaching full operational effectiveness by 1944, had transformed the dynamics of Pacific air combat. Capable of speeds exceeding 440 miles per hour and ranges extending over 1,500 miles with drop tanks, the Mustang could escort bombers deep into enemy territory, engage Japanese fighters on equal or superior terms, and delivered devastating ground attacks. The combination of speed, armament, and endurance meant that Japanese forces could no longer rely on concealment or terrain alone to protect them from aerial devastation. By June 1944, Japanese commanders were acutely aware that the skies no longer belonged to them. Previous tactics, camouflage, dispersal of artillery, and anti-aircraft emplacements, were increasingly ineffective. Even experienced pilots struggled to intercept fast-moving P-51s, while infantry positions became vulnerable to strafing runs and precise bombing. Reports from earlier island defenses illustrated the lethal efficiency of combined air operations. Entire regiments were disrupted, artillery silenced, and command cohesion shattered within hours of sustained aerial attack. The Japanese command structure faced unprecedented pressure. Officers had to make decisions with limited information, balancing the need to hold positions against the overwhelming risk of destruction from above. In many cases, commanders hesitated, torn between orders to defend at all costs and the survival instinct for their men. The looming presence of P-51 squadrons forced leaders to consider withdrawal, a move traditionally seen as dishonorable in the Imperial Japanese Army, yet increasingly necessary to preserve fighting capability. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. American pilots, operating with superior coordination, reconnaissance, and tactical support, approached the islands with confidence. Japanese defenders dug in and prepared for ground engagement, faced a reality for which no training could fully prepare them. Domination from the air that rendered trenches, ridges, and bunkers perilously exposed. On the morning of June 15, 1944, this imbalance would reach a climax. Japanese commanders, observing the distant glint of incoming Mustangs, recognized the overwhelming firepower and speed approaching their positions. The battlefield, long dominated by entrenched infantry, was about to be transformed into a theater of aerial supremacy. The decisions made in these crucial minutes would determine survival, morale, and the outcome of the engagements on the islands. The first glimpses of P-51s on the horizon marked the beginning of a confrontation that combined human fear, technological superiority, and strategic decision-making. The defenders' understanding of the stakes, their exposure, the speed of the incoming fighters, and the devastating potential of strafing attacks set the tone for the desperate choices to come. The Marianas campaign, part of the wider Allied strategy in the Pacific, aimed to secure airfields within striking distance of Japan itself. Capturing Saipan, Tinian, and Guam would allow B-29 bombers to operate with unprecedented reach, threatening the Japanese mainland directly. The Japanese High Command understood this, and their defenders prepared to hold the islands at almost any cost. Yet their preparations, though meticulous for infantry and artillery combat, could not fully account for the technological and tactical advantage of the American air forces. By early June 1944, American air raids had already weakened Japanese defensive positions. Long-range bombers softened beaches and ridges, while carrier-based fighters disrupted supply lines and communications. The Japanese soldiers, accustomed to conventional defensive warfare, faced an entirely new type of assault. Where once an advancing infantry wave could be countered with entrenched machine guns and mortars, now they confronted aircraft moving faster than the eye could track, capable of delivering instantaneous destruction with precise strafing and bombing runs. The P-51 Mustang, with its combination of speed, range, and firepower, had become a linchpin of Allied air strategy. Equipped with 650 caliber machine guns and capable of dive attacks from high altitude, these aircraft could sweep through defensive positions, suppress anti-aircraft fire, and support advancing ground forces simultaneously. The Japanese anti-aircraft artillery, often positioned to cover specific angles, struggled to respond to the high-speed, unpredictable movements of the Mustang formations. Even experienced gunners found it nearly impossible to track targets that appeared, strafed, and disappeared within seconds. Japanese commanders observed this growing threat with mounting concern. Communications were overwhelmed, as repeated air attacks disrupted coordination between artillery, infantry, and command posts. Troops dug into jungles, cliffs, and ridges, yet every position, no matter how fortified, was vulnerable from above. Reports from scouts and surviving units confirmed a sobering reality. The Americans now controlled the skies, and without air superiority, defensive operations on the islands could not succeed. The psychological impact was profound. Commanders had long relied on discipline and the promise of honor to motivate troops to hold positions against overwhelming odds. Yet the sight of hundreds of P-51s approaching, engines screaming and guns ready, introduced a new factor: fear of annihilation from a threat they could not directly confront. Officers struggled to maintain morale while grappling with the reality that withdrawal, though traditionally dishonorable, might be the only rational choice to preserve their forces. By mid-June, the tension reached a breaking point. Japanese defensive doctrine emphasized tenacity, but the combination of sustained bombing, rapid fighter attacks, and the speed of the approaching P-51 squadrons forced leaders to reconsider conventional tactics. Positions once thought defensible were now exposed. Supply lines were disrupted, communication was unreliable, and soldiers were exhausted from constant readiness and fear. The effectiveness of entrenched positions, bunkers, trenches, and jungle fortifications, was diminished in the face of a mobile and relentless aerial threat. When the P-51s appeared on the horizon that morning, commanders recognized the futility of holding ground without catastrophic losses. The technology, coordination, and speed of the American Air Forces had shifted the balance irreversibly. The Japanese leadership faced a difficult decision: adhere to traditional orders and risk annihilation, or issue retreat commands to preserve the lives of their men and maintain some operational capacity for future engagements. In this critical moment, a commander surveyed the unfolding scene from a forward observation post. The incoming formations of P-51s were not distant threats. They were an immediate, overwhelming presence. Every instinct honed by years of military training told him the ground could not be held. And so, faced with the relentless advance of American air power, he made a desperate plea to his officers: retreat, regroup, survive. Japanese defensive strategy in the Marianas had relied heavily on terrain, fortifications, and disciplined infantry. Bunkers hidden in dense jungle, cliffside positions, and interlocking fields of fire were designed to repel amphibious assaults and slow advancing troops. These tactics had been effective against traditional land-based attacks. Where patience, stealth, and coordination could control engagement outcomes, however, the arrival of P-51 Mustangs transformed the tactical landscape. Unlike slower bombers or propeller-driven interceptors, Mustangs combined speed, agility, and firepower, capable of striking with precision before defenders could respond. Japanese positions, once secure from frontal assaults, were suddenly exposed to strafing runs and dive attacks. Fortifications designed to resist bullets and shells from predictable angles offered little protection from aircraft attacking at 400 miles per hour, American. Pilots exploited these vulnerabilities with meticulous planning. Reconnaissance identified defensive layouts, bunker locations, and artillery emplacements. Pre-coordinated flight paths and timing ensured that multiple formations could attack simultaneously, overwhelming individual positions. Japanese soldiers, trained for ground-level threats, were forced to respond to dangers coming from above, shifting their focus and reducing their ability to mount coordinated defense. The speed and unpredictability of the P-51s left defenders little time to react. Machine guns swept through jungle canopies, roofs, and cliffside positions. Even experienced infantry found themselves forced to take cover under trees, in trenches, or behind minimal concealment, often with little effect against bullets descending from unexpected angles. Tactical advantage, once held by careful preparation and terrain mastery, was stripped away by the Americans' ability to dominate the airspace and dictate engagement timing. The P-51 Mustang itself was a technological marvel of the period. Its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine provided exceptional high-altitude performance, allowing it to escort bombers deep into enemy territory while maintaining speed and maneuverability. The aircraft carried 650 caliber Browning machine guns, capable of delivering concentrated fire with rapid accuracy. With drop tanks, it could sustain long missions, keeping pressure on Japanese positions across multiple islands. Beyond armament, the Mustang's design emphasized pilot visibility and control. Bubble canopies allowed a near-complete view of the battlefield, enabling pilots to identify targets quickly and coordinate attacks with wingmen. Advanced optics and synchronized firing ensured that strafing runs were precise, devastating fortified positions without wasting ammunition. For defenders, this meant that even hidden or partially camouflaged positions were vulnerable. Technology and training combined to create a weapon that could strike swiftly, accurately, and repeatedly. Human angle, fear, morale, and decision-making. The human dimension of this encounter cannot be overstated. Japanese soldiers, many of them seasoned veterans, were trained for endurance, discipline, and loyalty. Yet the sight of approaching P-51 formations induced a visceral fear. Unlike artillery, which could be anticipated, or infantry, which could be observed, the Mustangs introduced instantaneous, unpredictable threats. Commanders faced the dual challenge of maintaining morale while responding to an overwhelming threat. Decisions were made under extreme pressure, with the lives of thousands at stake. Retreat, though traditionally dishonorable in Japanese military doctrine, became a practical necessity. Soldiers' reactions ranged from panic to resolute attempts to hold position, highlighting the tension between training, honor, and survival instinct. The human factor extended to American pilots as well. Coordination, situational awareness, and precise execution demanded discipline. The success of the operation relied not only on aircraft and weapons, but on split-second judgment, teamwork, and the ability to anticipate enemy movements. Human skill amplified the technological advantage, ensuring that air superiority translated directly into operational dominance. Transition to angles, Section 2 through tactical innovation. Technological superiority, and the human element. American forces reshaped the battlefield. Japanese defenders, despite training and preparation, faced a reality in which the skies dictated outcomes, leadership angle, decisions. Under fire, Japanese commanders faced unprecedented pressure in the early hours of June 15, 1944. Their training emphasized tenacity, discipline, and holding positions regardless of cost. Yet the arrival of the P-51 Mustangs forced a dramatic reconsideration of conventional doctrine. Officers had to weigh loyalty and honor against the lives of their soldiers. Leadership became a balancing act between duty and survival. Commanders observed the incoming formations, recognizing the speed, precision, and coordination of the American attacks. Traditional defensive tactics were insufficient, and hesitation could result in catastrophic losses. Orders had to be given quickly, decisively, and under the duress of fear. One forward commander, witnessing the sheer scale of the air assault, faced a pivotal decision. The entrenched troops under his command were well positioned but vulnerable from above. He understood that a frontal engagement would lead to mass casualties. In a rare break from doctrine, he made the desperate choice to call for retreat, hoping to preserve the integrity of his forces. This decision, though controversial, reflected the growing importance of adaptive leadership in the face of technological superiority. The consequences of leadership extended beyond a single unit. Coordination between multiple posts, artillery, and infantry was necessary to execute an orderly withdrawal under fire. Every choice had immediate tactical implications and long-term strategic significance. A miscalculation could result in encirclement, annihilation, or collapse of morale across the island. Leadership was not simply about issuing commands. It became the mechanism by which survival was possible. Moral angle, retreat, honor. And survival retreat was traditionally viewed as dishonorable within the Imperial Japanese Army. Soldiers were taught to hold positions at all costs, often sacrificing life for perceived honor. The arrival of the P-51 Mustangs, however, forced commanders to confront a moral dilemma: preserve life through retreat or adhere to doctrine and face near-certain destruction. The decision to withdraw was not made lightly. Officers had to weigh the value of human life against the expectations of command hierarchy and cultural ideals of courage. Troops, though initially hesitant, quickly realized the necessity. Survival in this context became a moral imperative, enabling soldiers to fight another day rather than face annihilation under overwhelming firepower. For American forces, the moral dimension was different but equally complex. Pilots carried the responsibility of precision strikes, knowing that indiscriminate attacks could cause unnecessary casualties. Discipline, accuracy, and coordination ensured that air superiority was exercised strategically, reinforcing ethical conduct even amidst the chaos of war. Strategic angle. Air power as a decisive factor. The P-51 Mustangs were more than weapons. They were strategic game changers. Their ability to dominate the skies allowed American forces to dictate the tempo of engagements, control ground movements, and neutralize entrenched positions before ground forces even advanced. From a strategic perspective, this aerial superiority reshaped the Marianas campaign. Japanese commanders, previously confident in defensive positions, were forced to react, cede territory, and abandon positions that would have otherwise delayed American advances. Air power functioned as both a physical and psychological weapon, controlling not only movement but also morale and operational planning. The long-term implications were clear. Control of the airspace could determine the outcome of entire campaigns. The Marianas demonstrated that superior aircraft, coordinated attacks, and rapid tactical adjustments could overcome even the most well-prepared ground defenses. Commanders who understood this principle could exploit it to achieve decisive results, while those who underestimated it risked catastrophic losses. Transition to climax. Turning point through leadership under pressure, moral adaptation, and strategic application of air power. American forces forced Japanese commanders into untenable positions. The combination of speed, firepower, and psychological dominance set the stage for a decisive confrontation. June 15, 1944. The Marianas Islands were bathed in early sunlight, mist rolling over jagged ridges and dense jungle. From the defensive positions scattered across Saipan, Japanese troops watched the horizon, unaware that the air above would soon erupt with deadly precision. At 0730 hours, the first silhouettes appeared. P-51 Mustangs streaking low across the sky, engines screaming, their silver fuselages gleaming in the sun. Squadron formations moved with disciplined synchronicity, banks of machine guns already tracing predicted lines of fire. For the Japanese defenders, the sight was both surreal and terrifying. Their fortifications, designed to repel infantry assaults, were suddenly exposed to attacks from an unexpected vector: the sky. Commanders barked orders, attempting to reposition artillery and alert infantry, but the speed of the incoming fighters left little room for reaction. Observation posts reported incoming strafing runs, yet ground units had minimal time to seek cover. The first bursts of .50 caliber fire swept across trenches and jungle foliage, dismounting machine guns and forcing soldiers to press into the mud and undergrowth. The human impact was immediate. Soldiers froze, hesitant to expose themselves. Many were seasoned veterans, yet fear at the unrelenting assault caused hesitation, broken ranks, and panic. Commanders shouted, gesturing frantically, trying to coordinate a defensive response. Yet the P-51s moved faster than any human could track, strafing and diving with unerring accuracy, targeting command posts, gun emplacements, and supply caches. The Japanese commander who had earlier debated retreat now faced undeniable proof. His forces could not hold under this aerial onslaught. The speed, coordination, and lethality of the Mustangs made conventional defense impossible. With a voice trembling from urgency and fear, he ordered a withdrawal, pleading with officers to execute a retreat while some cohesion remained. His desperation underscored the dramatic shift in the battlefield, from ground-based dominance to air-dictated reality. American pilots continued their assault with calculated precision. Formations maintained altitude spacing to maximize firepower, while minimizing vulnerability to anti-aircraft fire. Ground observers noted the coordinated targeting of key positions. Artillery pieces silenced first, followed by command posts, and then infantry strongpoints. The sequence ensured that Japanese forces could not regroup effectively, reducing their ability to mount counterattacks. The psychological effect was profound. Troops already exhausted from constant readiness now faced overwhelming fear. Every movement seemed to invite destruction. Even experienced soldiers struggled to maintain composure, as the sky became a theater of relentless aggression. Morale plummeted as retreat became not only advisable, but necessary for survival. The first wave of P-51 attacks lasted for nearly 45 minutes, each sortie reinforcing the Americans' air superiority. Coordination between air units, reconnaissance, and communication with naval artillery created a network of lethal precision. Ground forces could only react defensively, forced into motion dictated entirely by the air assaults. Positions once thought secure were obliterated within minutes, demonstrating the decisive power of combined air-ground operations. By 0830 hours, the battlefield had shifted irrevocably. Japanese defensive lines were in disarray, command structures weakened, and morale fractured. The decision to retreat, once controversial, became essential for survival. American air dominance had effectively rewritten the rules of engagement, proving that speed, coordination, and technological advantage could overcome even the most disciplined ground forces. As the first wave of P-51 Mustangs withdrew momentarily to refuel and regroup, Japanese troops scrambled to obey their commander's desperate order: retreat. What had once been a disciplined, well-drilled force became a mass of uncertainty, fear, and urgent movement. Dense jungle, rocky ridges, and narrow pathways slowed the withdrawal, leaving soldiers vulnerable to follow-up strafing runs. American pilots returned within minutes, their formations tighter and more synchronized than before. They had observed retreat patterns and calculated likely paths through jungle trails and open clearings. Precision fire targeted bottlenecks, cutting off escape routes, destroying supply caches, and further disorienting defenders. Every burst of .50 caliber fire was calculated, designed to force hesitation and maximize psychological pressure. The Japanese commander, moving among his officers, shouted orders to maintain cohesion, but chaos prevailed. Soldiers, many burdened with heavy packs and equipment, struggled to move through terrain that had offered protection only moments earlier. Artillery crews attempted to withdraw their guns, but lack of mobility and continuous aerial pressure slowed progress. Communication lines were severed by downed runners and disrupted radios, leaving units isolated and unsure of their neighbors' positions. The human cost was immediate. Casualties mounted as soldiers exposed themselves to fire in narrow pathways or while attempting to retrieve essential equipment. Panic spread among the ranks, with some abandoning positions entirely, seeking cover wherever possible. Officers worked tirelessly to restore order, yet each attempt to regroup was met with further strafing from returning P-51s. American air dominance allowed for constant observation and adjustment. Pilots reported the positions of retreating units to ground control and coordinated subsequent attacks with naval artillery. The combination of aerial firepower and artillery precision ensured the Japanese forces could not consolidate, turning a retreat into a harrowing, fragmented withdrawal. The psychological impact of this relentless pressure cannot be overstated. Troops who had trained for endurance and discipline were overwhelmed by the speed, coordination, and lethality of the attacks. Morale collapsed as soldiers witnessed comrades falling under precise, inescapable fire. Even officers trained to inspire and direct were forced into reactive leadership, prioritizing survival over conventional orders. By midday, the once fortified positions on Saipan were largely abandoned. The Japanese commander, witnessing the destruction and disarray, had achieved only partial preservation of his forces. Those who survived were scattered, demoralized, and exhausted. The battlefield had been fundamentally altered. American air power dictated every movement, forced retreat over choice, and controlled the pace of engagement. The engagement highlighted a key principle of modern warfare. Initiative and technological advantage can decisively undermine entrenched defenders, no matter their training or previous experience. The P-51 Mustang, piloted by disciplined, coordinated crews, had not only inflicted physical damage but reshaped the psychological landscape, forcing commanders to act against deeply ingrained doctrine to preserve life. This decisive moment confirmed the strategic value of air superiority. Ground defenses, no matter how well prepared, were vulnerable when enemy aircraft could strike with precision, anticipate movements, and coordinate with supporting units. The Marianas campaign thus became a case study in the combined effects of technology, leadership, and human resilience under overwhelming force. By late afternoon, the skies cleared, and the first wave of survivors regrouped in secondary positions. The Japanese commander, while preserving a fraction of his forces, had witnessed the full extent of American air power. Retreat, though a bitter concession, had prevented total annihilation. Yet the psychological scars and tactical losses would reverberate throughout the campaign. The battlefield, once thought defensible, had been transformed by the speed, precision, and coordination of the Mustangs. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly. The events of June 15, 1944, would not only define the immediate tactical outcome, but would also illustrate the broader operational consequences of air supremacy in the Pacific theater. By the end of June 15, 1944, the immediate consequences of the P-51 Mustang assault were clear. Japanese positions across Saipan had been disrupted, with entrenched units retreating in disarray and key fortifications rendered untenable. Artillery emplacements that had once dominated approaches were silenced, and supply lines had been shredded by coordinated strafing runs. The battlefield, once controlled by careful defensive planning, had been decisively ceded to American air power. The surviving Japanese troops faced the grim reality of their losses. Casualty reports gathered over the following hours highlighted the impact of precise preemptive air attacks. Hundreds of soldiers were killed or wounded in the initial strafing runs, while many more were incapacitated by psychological shock. Morale, long sustained by discipline and ideology, suffered severely. Soldiers who had trained for relentless defense now confronted a force that could strike from above, with unrelenting precision, undermining their confidence and cohesion. Commanders were forced to reassess their defensive strategy. The concept of holding ground at all costs had proven unsustainable under the pressure of coordinated air assaults. Retreat, though initially perceived as dishonorable, became a strategic necessity. Officers worked to reorganize scattered units, establish secondary defensive lines, and preserve as much combat effectiveness as possible. Yet despite these efforts, the scale of disruption ensured that Japanese forces would enter subsequent engagements weakened, both materially and psychologically. American forces, in contrast, gained immediate operational advantages. Infantry units moving into positions previously dominated by entrenched Japanese troops encountered far less resistance. Artillery could be deployed effectively without the constant threat of counterfire from prepared positions. Coordination between ground and air units allowed American commanders to dictate the tempo of operations, exploiting both technological and psychological dominance. The broader lesson of the engagement was evident. Air supremacy had become a decisive factor in modern warfare. Even experienced and disciplined defenders, prepared for conventional engagements, were vulnerable when confronted with overwhelming speed, precision, and coordination from the air. The P-51 Mustangs had not only inflicted physical damage, but had reshaped the psychological and operational landscape, forcing commanders to act reactively rather than proactively. Reports from surviving Japanese units highlighted the disruption of communication, coordination, and morale. The need to retreat under fire prevented organized counterattacks and rendered many pre-planned defensive operations ineffective. Soldiers, disoriented by the speed and lethality of the attack, struggled to regroup in secondary positions. Commanders recognized that traditional strategies would no longer suffice. The battle had shifted fundamentally in favor of American air and combined forces. The psychological dimension cannot be overstated. Japanese troops, trained to hold positions under extreme conditions, were forced to confront fear and uncertainty on a scale previously unseen. Retreat became not just a tactical maneuver but a survival imperative, challenging cultural and military norms. For American pilots, success required precise execution, discipline, and coordination, emphasizing that the human element in warfare remained critical even amidst technological dominance. By the close of day, the battlefield had been transformed. The Japanese commander, while having preserved a portion of his forces, had witnessed the full scope of American air power. The strategic, psychological, and operational consequences would reverberate across the Marianas campaign, illustrating the decisive impact of controlling the skies. The aftermath of the P-51 assault on Saipan revealed the full scale of its operational and psychological impact. Japanese defenses, once meticulously prepared, were left in disarray. Trenches and bunkers had been abandoned, artillery pieces destroyed or disabled, and communication networks severed. Survivors attempted to regroup in secondary positions, but the cohesion of their units had been irrevocably compromised. Casualty reports underscored the lethal efficiency of the Mustang attacks. Hundreds of soldiers had been killed in the initial strafing runs, while many more were wounded or immobilized by fear and confusion. The Japanese High Command recognized the operational consequences. A force that had trained for defense could no longer function effectively when confronted with relentless aerial dominance. Retreat, once considered dishonorable, had become an essential tactic to preserve combat capability. American forces gained more than just tactical advantage. Ground units, previously slowed by entrenched defenders, now faced less resistance, allowing rapid advances and the consolidation of captured positions. Coordination between air and ground forces proved decisive, demonstrating the importance of integrated operations. By dictating the timing, location, and intensity of attacks, American commanders were able to control the pace of the campaign, leaving Japanese forces constantly reacting. The psychological effects extended beyond immediate casualties. Japanese soldiers who had witnessed the precision and speed of the Mustangs began to lose confidence in traditional defensive strategies. Morale, previously bolstered by ideology and training, eroded under the realization that the skies were no longer contested. Retreats under fire, once rare and shameful, became a survival imperative. Commanders were forced to balance doctrine with pragmatism, issuing orders that prioritized life over honor, a shift that challenged deeply ingrained military and cultural norms. Strategically, the success of the P-51 operations reinforced the importance of air superiority in the Pacific theater. Control of the skies allowed American forces to not only destroy enemy positions, but also shape the movement of troops on the ground. The campaign demonstrated that even well-prepared defenders were vulnerable if their airspace was dominated. Subsequent engagements across the Pacific incorporated these lessons, emphasizing coordinated air-ground operations, preemptive strikes, and rapid adaptation to enemy movements. Reports from post-battle assessments confirmed that the Japanese defensive doctrine needed reconsideration. Trenches, bunkers, and natural terrain, once viewed as formidable advantages, were insufficient when opposed by aircraft capable of high-speed, precise attacks. Even elite soldiers could be neutralized if their positions were exposed to coordinated air assault, highlighting a transformation in the nature of warfare. For American forces, the campaign validated strategic planning, technological superiority, and pilot training. The combination of reconnaissance, disciplined execution, and integrated air-ground operations created an overwhelming advantage. The ability to anticipate enemy movements, strike preemptively, and maintain continuous pressure redefined what it meant to achieve battlefield dominance. By the conclusion of the initial P-51 operations, the Japanese forces on Saipan were fragmented, morale was shaken, and defensive capability was drastically reduced. The Marianas campaign would continue, but the lessons of June 15, 1944, had been made unmistakably clear. Air superiority, human coordination, and decisive leadership could determine the outcome of an entire theater before a single ground engagement was resolved. The events of June 15, 1944, on Saipan illustrate a profound shift in the nature of warfare. For centuries, entrenched positions, terrain mastery, and disciplined infantry had defined the outcome of battles. Yet the arrival of the P-51 Mustangs demonstrated that control of the skies could rewrite the rules entirely. What once seemed secure under trees, cliffs, and bunkers became exposed, vulnerable and at the mercy of speed, precision, and coordination from above. For Japanese commanders, the encounter presented a moral and strategic dilemma. Doctrine demanded tenacity and resistance, yet survival required adaptation. The decision to retreat, driven by necessity rather than choice, challenged traditional notions of honor and obedience. Officers and soldiers confronted the limits of human endurance, fear, and ingenuity, realizing that flexibility and awareness could outweigh training, ideology, and numbers in determining survival. American forces exemplified the integration of technology, strategy, and human skill. Pilots executed complex maneuvers with split-second precision, guided by reconnaissance training and coordination. The effectiveness of the P-51s was not merely in their firepower, but in the discipline and foresight of those who wielded them. In these moments, human skill amplified technological advantage, demonstrating that victory arises from the union of intellect, timing, and execution. The broader lesson extends beyond the Pacific theater. Warfare had entered an era where air supremacy dictated the flow of engagement, forcing adaptation, recalibration, and innovation. The skies became a dominant factor, influencing not only movement and strategy but also morale and decision-making. Leaders who could perceive threats from multiple dimensions and act decisively held the key to operational success. Ultimately, the story of Saipan on that morning is a testament to human resilience and the transformative power of technology in warfare. It reminds us that control is never absolute, that survival often demands difficult choices, and that the battlefield is as much a contest of perception and anticipation as it is of firepower. The sky commanded the ground, and those who recognized and adapted to that reality endured.